All right, welcome back to my channel. I'm very sorry, I've been gone for like 2 weeks. I had a surprise visit from my sisters from Canada. We did some traveling, went to Salzburg and Vienna, and then I traveled to Serbia as well with my family. So I've been a little busy and got a little bit sick from all my traveling, so wasn't really in a good situation to be speaking on camera. But let's dive right in on this July 25th. I'm going to talk about three things today. I'm going to talk about McCain's brain and the Keating Five. I'm going to talk a little bit about the healthcare and the Republican split, and then I'm going to end off talking a little bit about the Russia collusion. So let's start with McCain's brain. And this is a big problem right now in the Senate, obviously needing every single vote. He's coming back to Congress today, to the Senate. And again, I have really mixed feelings about McCain. I appreciate him for his service in Vietnam. Obviously showed a lot of grit and integrity going through his capture and torture. But to me, McCain's political career sort of changed after he was implicated in the Keating Five. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Keating Five, and please Google that and check it out, this was a case where McCain was helping along with four other senators, another senator from Arizona, one from California, one from Michigan, and I can't remember where the fifth one was from, but essentially they were helping this savings and loans corporation that was essentially going under, and it was going to cost the American people $1 billion or so in loans, and they defaulted, and they were essentially protected by these five senators, and three of them were indicted for corruption. They never ran for Senate again, but McCain and one other senator ended up running again, and were elected, and of course McCain is a senator to this day. And you sort of see his timeline of his career, and it seems as though he might have been made a deal with the devil, so to speak. Really, his behavior since then has been sporadic at best, and there are now some implications that perhaps the brain tumor that he has affected his effects in some of his committees, and he had asked some very bizarre questions in one of his recent Senate committee meetings, and seemed a little bit disoriented. So for me personally, some of his decisions in regards to Ukraine and Crimea, trying to expand NATO in Montenegro, him visiting some of the rebels that may or may not be implicated with ISIS in Syria, generally just his constant criticism of his own president right now, and not necessarily being obstructionist, but certainly having a little bit too much media spotlight, and not necessarily for the right reasons. Also, if you remember, he was one of the people that promulgated the dossier, also known as PP-gate. So really, John McCain, to me, seems like he may have ulterior motives at certain points. I know that he obviously is someone with a lot of hubris, and he pushes his own agenda, but I also think that he may or may not be compromised. And that's something that I can't prove, but from the outside looking in, if he was very loyal to his party, it's just not showing up in his day-to-day actions, his TD appearances, and things of that nature. So that's my thoughts on John McCain. However, you can separate the man from the office, and I wish him a speedy recovery. And he served with distinction for most of his career and did run for president twice. So all the best. Good luck with that. But certainly not going to lose any sleep if he no longer is a senator in the near future, and I'll just leave it at that. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Republican Party and Obamacare. This has become a bit of a disaster. Obviously, it was really difficult to get it out of the House, the bill. They had to delay, they lost a vote, and now that one got through. Senators are now pushing and pulling on whether or not to take recess in August, which I personally think they shouldn't. Get to work. You guys have enough time off, and you're getting slammed at home anyway. I know at the 4th of July, a lot of people were going to town hall meetings, marching in parades, and getting absolutely crucified. So get some work done, get this bill at least in a debate. I understand sort of the far right wing or the Tea Party wing like Rand Paul. I get where you're coming from. This doesn't do enough to satisfy your needs, but you're between a rock and a hard place here. And realistically, Donald Trump ran on a repeal and replace. Donald Trump essentially delivered the majority in the House and in the Senate. If you don't get this bill done, it affects your tax cut ability for the tax reform. You can't pay for anything until you sort of fix that. You want to get the budget out preemptively this time, as opposed to having a lag on getting the budget out. Everything's sort of is trapped with this Obamacare nightmare. And look, I come from a place called Canada. I also was born in England, so I know about the NHS, I know about universal healthcare. In general, I'm for universal healthcare. Let me get that out of the way. Now, I'm not from a country with 333 million people with massive vested interest in insurance companies. I'm also not somebody who has any idea how to fix this problem. I'm pretty good with policy, but when it comes to healthcare, it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. What I will say is that if it's not a fully socialized medicine or universal healthcare, and you're running sort of this two-tier system, not a two-tier system, but basically it's a hybrid system, you better get it right, because right now what you've got is states that are essentially in a single-payer system, but from the private side, so there's no choice. But then you're also simultaneously mandating people pay for healthcare. So what that means is that you're forcing someone to buy something, and it's essentially a monopoly in that state. So some of the easy fixes that Trump talks about, like being able to buy the healthcare across state lines, 100% believe in that. I think that's great. I don't necessarily think you should force people to purchase healthcare right now, or if you do, there may be a possibility where you have a very basic policy that can be purchased. I know that's something Ted Cruz floated. It was largely panned because of the implications of how that can affect the insurance companies. But look, if you're going to force people to have healthcare, you better make sure that you're taking everybody into consideration, and you better make sure that the people that gain in the end are not the insurance companies, okay? So either get out of the system completely and leave it as a private system, or really work on this bill and make sure that it addresses the issues. Now, one issue that I'm 100% with the Democrats on is pre-existing conditions. No 5-year-old child should be born with a defect, a heart condition, or in their early ages, 3, 4, 5 years old, let's say they have leukemia. Nobody should be turned away. The flip side of this is that how did American healthcare work before? Well, obviously you had charitable healthcare, you had a lot of organizations, charities that would cover these serious situations. But again, even an adult that finds out about a pre-existing condition before, let's say, they have healthcare, I think that pre-existing conditions is really the crux of this argument. And to get some buy-in from the Democrats, which I know is not going to happen, but again, if you look at Donald Trump, not really a Republican, not really that conservative, getting some bipartisan buy-in on a brand new bill, if they fully repeal the bill, would probably be the best way to go logically for the country. However, that's probably not going to happen. So what you're most likely going to see is a vote to open up the debate, then possibly a full repeal with a 2-year window, and then them work on getting that new bill in place over the next couple of years. The flip side of that, of course, is what happens in 2018. Are they going to win the election there or not for the midterms? To me personally, if they don't deal with Obamacare, they're going to lose their majority in the midterm elections. So very precarious times. Republicans, you've talked about repealing and replacing Obamacare for 7 years. Get it done. It's unacceptable. You should have had a plan in place. It's like you didn't expect to win, and now you just look so unprepared. It's super unorganized. It's super disrespectful to the people that voted for you, and your infighting is giving people no confidence in your ability to govern. So that's my talking on Obamacare. Let's see where it goes. Last but not least, Russian collusion. Yay, the nothing burger that won't go away. Look, I got a lot of views on this. I personally think it's a pretty big joke. I've worked on a bunch of campaigns, as I told you before. Just to give you some insight onto what happens on a campaign, I was working on a municipal campaign in 2012, and our candidate was considered left-wing at the time, and he was homosexual and had a little bit of a checkered past with partying a little bit too much, doing some things that probably he shouldn't have when he was younger. The right-wing candidate waited till a week before the election and then propagated all this information about his past in conservative ridings, or conservative, what you would consider conservative districts. Putting up signs like, this candidate is gay, this candidate did drugs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which basically swung the election. So, somebody did some pretty grimy opposition research on him and held that information until the last minute. He had addressed it in public, and he talked about, you know, his past as someone who was a younger man and maybe had a little too much fun in university. You know, everybody's probably been there at some point in time. But basically, it cost him his election. And the point of that is that campaigns will look for dirty information at both sides. And Hillary Clinton's campaign, the DNC met with Ukraine. Obviously, Trump Jr. took the meeting to meet and talk about some dirt that could have been on Hillary. You know, whether or not there are ulterior motives there, if I was going to guess, I wouldn't think this has really anything to do with the election. It looks more so like a long range or a long-term play to do with business in Russia in the future for the Trump business. You know, Trump's a savvy guy. He knows that his empire is going to be set up forever with his name, with Ivanka, with Donald Jr., with Eric, with his grandchildren. You know, despite the divorces, despite some of the tumultuous times in his family, he's a family man. You know, and he's looking at his empire growing exponentially. That's why, you know, he's talking tough with China, talking a little bit tough on certain countries, but then he's pulling it back and inviting them to Mar-a-Lago. So I think that he's probably going to look to set up business in Russia in the future. Yeah, if I was a gambling man, I would say that you'll see a Trump Tower, you know, in Russia, you know, after he's out of office, whether that's in 2020 or 2024. I don't necessarily think it had anything to do with collusion with the election. Regardless, Hillary Clinton wasn't going to win that election. A lot of the internal polls were rigged. A lot of the information that was being disseminated by mainstream media we know is absolute nonsense. Fake dossiers. You're really grasping at straws to make something look worse than it is. And if you want to talk about Russia and collusion, John Podesta has way more business dealings with Russia than anyone in the Trump campaign. You know, way more than even Paul Manafort. And if you want to take it a step further, Hillary Clinton, through the State Department, you know, and it was with other agencies as well, but while Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, she authorized Russia being able to buy 20% of America's uranium production. So let's be reasonable here. There was no rules in place before saying, you know, you can't take a meeting with, let's say, Ambassador Kislyak and talk about the future of the country and how they can integrate. I was in charge of ethno-cultural campaign outreach on one of my campaigns. And almost every day we were meeting with high-level leaders from every single country that lived in Canada, whether they be businessmen or at huge galas that were through, you know, the Sri Lankan, you know, social club, or, you know, a big event with the Chinese community in their, you know, sub-pocket of Toronto. So this happens all the time. This idea that you don't meet with world leaders or business leaders from other countries, it's pretty much ridiculous. So let's not talk about this Russia burger as much as we Russia burger. Let's not talk about this nothing burger about Russia too much. If something really important happens, we'll go into it. Last but not least, props to Scaramucci for getting rid of Sean Spicer. Sean Spicer, you were one of the worst press secretaries I've ever seen. As a comms director, you have totally flubbed every single opportunity you've had to deflate some of this animosity. And look, I think you should be doing on-camera sessions, you know, in the press secretary's White House correspondence area. I don't understand why you stopped doing those. I think that's some really nonsense for you to even consider that being reasonable. Sometimes you got to push back on the president if he decides things that don't make sense. That's it for me today, July 25th. Thanks for joining me. Sorry for the delay in getting a third video up, but we're going to get a bunch up this week, and we're going to keep going with the news as it happens. So please like, subscribe, and comment as you see fit. Ciao for now.